As we reached Ivory's hut, even in my exhausted state, I instinctively realized that something felt off. Namely, while things looked familiar, it didn't feel like we'd been traveling long enough, or in the right direction, for that matter. The interior was laid out exactly the same as the other, though the dusty darkness gave me this odd feeling like I'd stepped several weeks into the future. It was clearly Ivory's hut, and yet it wasn't, in the sense that we'd built our friendship somewhere else. I don't know why it bugged me so much, but it did. Not that I had the energy to do much more than gawk. Ivory caught my gaze and hastily offered an explanation. With such a big forest, I can't always be in the same place all the time. Wouldn't the estate be much safer? I asked. Ivory nodded. It would be, if we could get there. Having the roads watched is probably the first thing Prideful would have done. And we'd be sitting ducks, I admitted. Blaze let out something resembling a grunt. Though, as I watched Ivory glance over her shoulder for the 10th time this trip, and the first with the door shut, I suspected she wanted someone else to find us. I might have said more, but every inch of my body ached in protest at the very thought of a second journey. Despite that, I found some part of me was still restless and tried to reason with it. Given the mob's hesitation to make the first move while we were on their turf, I was willing to bet they'd spend days trying to make someone else take the first step into the forest. I felt the edginess ebb away, leaving me with only pain and fatigue. I'd been so focused on Blaze that it was only then, standing in the middle of the hut, that the reality of my wounds caught up with me. My legs had simply had enough. 1 second I was looking straight ahead, the next I was face down on the ground. Poor Ivory was left to juggle 2 incapacitated mares, though her magic certainly helped ease the situation. Her aura slid over the hay bed, both smoothing and thinning it out such more that more than one pony could fit. The whole time, she continued to brace Blaze with her body, slowly but surely, leading the way over. Next, Ivory stood over me, her horn becoming a blinding column of light. The room lit up as though a fully fed fire were dancing in the fireplace, and I felt her magic close in on me. There's something strange, almost unsettling, about being held in a unicorn's magic, but at the same time, it also kind of tickled. It may sound like a strange observation for some pony who routinely travels through the air on magical wings, but take it from me that both modes of transportation are very different from each other. I might even venture to say that the lack of control makes it even worse for us Pegasi. Once I was settled into my bed, Ivory appeared over me, her forelocks slick with sweat, but she paid a little mind, her eyes rolling over the length of my body. She lifted each of my legs in turn, her magic poking here and there. I couldn't help but make the odd yelp when she came across a particularly tender spot, a surprising amount of which were on my chest. Given how hard my legs had given out, I'd expected far more damage down there. "You're lucky you're so resilient," Ivory finally said, eyes flickering up only momentarily. Some pony with less magical tolerance would have met with a much less pleasant fate. "Guess I just don't know when to quit." I squeaked out a pained laugh in a vain attempt to keep the exploding zombie bird from creeping back into my mind. Don't say things like that." Blaze's face screwed up into a grimace as she curled herself up. No more death. Please." "Sorry," was all I could manage. My mind had become mud, every thought a slog, and with each effort, my eyes grew heavier. Elaboration would have to wait. "You'll be fine with some rest." Ivory looked from me to Blaze. "So there's no need to worry." "Good," I said, allowing the murky darkness to finally wash over me. And somewhere in there, I thought I felt a muzzle touch my forelock. The creak of a door opening brushed at my consciousness, and for a few moments, I thought that I was in the first hut. Maybe, just maybe, my leg was still healing. I'd woken up, and we'd have a nice chat. Just the two of us. It was a time before Blaze was captured, before I'd failed to get the poster. A time before Ivory had revealed to the townsfolk, and the mob was just chasing a vague, fictional necromancer. I wanted to cry, but my lids merely bit into a dry crustiness that had formed around them. I heaved them open, only to be met with a blurry orange blob. As I jerked my head back, pain cleaved across my neck and chest. The face came into focus. Ah, Blaze, personal space. Sorry. Blaze's face flushed as she darted back. It's just, you were making weird noises, and I got worried. I shook my head and tried to smile. No, it's fine. I appreciate the concern. She let out a laugh, a tinge of lingering embarrassment, throwing it off level. I know I shouldn't have. You were tough enough. I blinked, taking a moment to glance around the hut. Save the table, select sections of the floor, and the fireplace. The dusting of disuse still covered everything. I wondered if it was because I hadn't been asleep for long, that the others, or that there were other priorities. Thanks. What brought that on? Blaze scuffed a hoof, stealing a glance at her flank. The hair had just barely begun to grow back, giving it a short, fuzzy texture that reminded me of one of those carpets of moss. You mean, aside from surviving all those attacks? How about recovering in 2 days when Ivory said it would take you a week? I shifted a bit, my body creaking and groaning as I attempted to get a good look at myself. A wave of nausea rolled over me, flattening me against the ground. I think you might want to reconsider that assessment. Oh, here! Blaze had gone back in an instant. A bowl of water brushed up against my muzzle. Ivory said this would help you with the pain. I practically sucked the whole thing down with one big gulp. It tasted and smelled awful, but somehow it made me feel less like retching. Still, I wasn't sure if the nausea or the lingering aftertaste was worse. I looked up at Blaze, who grinned. Hey, it worked! I nodded slowly, the nausea still fleeing my system. Thanks for being quick about it. Blaze stepped back, and after a few moments my senses were about as close to clear as I could hope. With some rather undignified grunting, I struggled to my haunches. I teetered a little, but was relieved to find that sitting upright was at least within my current capabilities, which meant that it was time to see just how bad things were. I looked down at my chest, where I still felt the rawest. Sure enough, there were claw-shaped depressions where my hair had melted away, the faintest lines of each claw seared into the skin. Ivory's words came echoing back to me, followed quite shortly by the image of the devastated shop front. I shuddered. Does this happen often? Blaze asked. What? Getting attacked by evil bandit mages? I peered up at her. Maybe? If that's a thing that happens, I mean. The story you told me, when you said before you were a traveler, not an adventurer. She motioned in the air with her forehooves, though she produced little more than misshapen circles. Yeah? What of it? A sad look washed over Blaze's face. Is that your life? Just one mess after another? I shook my head. They come up more often than I'd like. Let's leave it at that. She bowed her head, letting out a bitter chuckle. And to think, I used to dream about this. A sardonic smirk crept across my lips. Tell me about it. The door creaked open, and Ivory, followed by Ernest, stepped inside. "You're awake!" Ernest's voice held just a slight quiver as he charged over to Blaze and pressed his chin tightly against her neck. "You have to stop doing this." She shrunk into her father's chest. I know. But she needed my help. I couldn't sit there and do nothing." "How are you feeling?" Ivory asked, eyeing me up and down. "Better." I tried to smile. "Just had a little bit of trouble getting up." She looked down at the empty bowl. "Understandable, considering how hurt you are. Give it another day or two." Ivory glanced over at Blaze. "How's your leg?" "Just fine," Blaze answered, demonstrating by trotting a quick circle around Ernest. He placed a forehoof on her chest. "Good. Then we can get out of here." "Wait, what?" Blaze stepped back to look her father in the eye. "Your mother and I have gathered what we could and shut down the inn. We're leaving town." Ernest answered before turning to Ivory. "I'm sorry to delay this again, but once I'm certain Silver and Blaze are safe, I'll return." Ivory's eyes fell to the floor. "Will you really?" "Yes. I swear it on my life." Ernest drew himself tall and bowed his head, as though he were making a promise to a superior. Whoa, wait! Blaze jumped between them and waved her forehooves. "We're just going to give up? We're going to abandon the pasture and leave it with him?" "He is precisely why we have to leave. There's nothing more we can do at this moment, and he knows you're involved. I won't risk leaving you within his reach," Ernest replied, a grim resolve spreading across his face. "What do you mean? There's nothing we can do. We could do something rash that makes him a martyr among townfolk, and us fugitives for life?" Ernest gave her a stern look. "Escalating the situation will simply play into his hooves." Blaze slumped. Similarly, my stomach felt like a rock, and my body sunk accordingly. "He's right, and I'm sorry. If only I'd gotten the poster, maybe things would be different." "Don't be." Ernest shook his head. "I don't know what led up to the riot, but I have no doubt that it was an exceptionally unlucky situation. I think I speak for all of us when I say we'd be sad if you died over a poster." "Yeah!" Blaze chimed in. Ivory nodded in agreement. I gave them my best reassuring smile, even though their words couldn't completely drive away the guilt. "So then, the letter. Can you do anything with it?" "I can have my friends look into it. It's certainly suspicious enough to start an investigation. However, know that Prideful will likely catch wind and have ample time to prepare. But they know I don't pursue frivolous things. It may take time, but they'll find a way through his wall of lies." Blaze and I exchanged solemn glances. "And it's not the only front he'll face," Ernest added. "Now that the rage is worn off, ponies are asking questions. He clearly overestimated himself, and he's paying the price. While we can barely see it today, his power is showing cracks, and once that sort of thing is there, it never goes away." A small smile crept to my lips, rising with my spirits. I looked from Blaze to Ivory. "So, we can't meet him head on, but that doesn't mean we're giving up. One day, everyone will be sick of Prideful Policy's games. One day, they'll realize that dark magic is simply a tool, and it is the ponies who misuse those tools who are evil." Can ponies really change so much? Ivory stared ahead, that lost filly swimming back to the surface of her eyes. I motioned to the rest of us. "We may be few, but we didn't we?" Ivory turned to me and blinked. The silence hung in the air like fresh snow. Slow, drifting, and hopeful. A smile began to form, shy, but contented, and as bright as the morning sun. Yes, I guess you did. A nearly imperceivable giggle touched her muzzle, and she gave us all a sheepish look. I never introduced myself to you, did I? You didn't? Blaze blinked. I pondered for a moment. Not formally, at least not to me. But you still trusted us with your name. That's what matters, Ernest added. Half. Ivory's grin shrank a little. I tilted my head. Half? Her horn lit up, brushing her forelock out of her eye as she extended a hoof. My name is Ivory Hope. Nice to meet you. I stood atop the edge of the valley, a cool breeze sifting through my mane as I stared down the trail. It was a rocky, winding path, not unlike the dozen I'd seen before. Lush green foliage of all kinds carpeted the valley wall, hiding parts of the path as it worked its way towards Crystalside. The town itself was hardly the pinnacle of tourism, but it was still grand enough to stick out like a sore hoof. Large, rough shacks sprung up among the trees, their alignment surprisingly organized. A multitude of colored dots milled around the largest, most central building. And at once, we had our target. I glanced at Ivory, who for the 15th time gave me an uncertain look, and for the 15th time, I matched it with a reassuring smile. There had been some persuasion, yes, but there was no question that with the precarious state of her current reputation, Ivory needed to lay low. That meant no sightings of neither zombies nor strange cloaked figures, though the need to make such appearances was lower than ever. With the bandits' leadership beheaded, the rest disappeared into the night. I can only speculate, but I suspect that the fear I saw in the one thing holding them together. With that gone, they dissolved as everyone sought to look out for themselves. I could only hope that some of them, at least one particular stallion, found their way into a less unsavory profession. In any event, it was the right time for a vacation, and even though she kept glancing back over her shoulder like a worried mother, I think Ivory knew as much as I did that coming out to Crystalside would give her the distance needed to breathe a little. Sure, there would still be some troubles back in pasture, with battles undoubtedly on the horizon. But for that moment, we were just two mares, two friends on a journey, and we had a jewel to see. Ready? I asked. Ivory closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath and holding it. When she finally let it go, the entirety of her being seemed to calmer. In fact, the little filly had returned to her eye, sparkling with curiosity. Yeah. A week is far too little time, but better than nothing. Even if we'd had 1 or 100 years, all good things must come to an end. Life goes on. We parted in tears at one of Ivory's huts, a strange contrast to the first march that really kicked off our struggle. They say that friendship forged in the trials of fire is among the strongest things in the world. On that day, I felt no statement could be truer. We said our goodbyes, knowing that they wouldn't be our last. The other would most certainly survive until next time. And so, she returned to her guardianship, and I to Ponyville. I kept tabs on pasture, watching for any signs of an opening. But it quickly became clear that even with what we had, going to pasture, or going against Prideful, was playing the long game. So I kept Ivory in my heart and waited. Life went on.